y'all, welcome and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan, and every single day this month, and honestly maybe beyond, I'm toying with the idea of just doing this every day for the foreseeable future. I will be reading your scary stories that you guys have sent in to me. If you have any scary stories you would like for me to read, please send those in. All of the information will be below in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into these stories. Story number 1, this is the story of my mimic. These are only a few of my stories. Even when I was little, I was attached to the supernatural. I have many stories about the mimic and I want to talk about it. I'll try to keep it in chronological order from my oldest to youngest stories. There's only 3 and they're moderately short. The first story. I was around 4 years old and I was at home because I hadn't started school yet. I remember having free range of the little TV in my bedroom, watching a video of LD Shadow Lady playing The Walking Dead. I was proper scared because I was 4, so I turned it off. Well, when I turned it off, I heard a small knocking on my bedroom door. The door was closed and it was only me and my mom home. I knew it wasn't my mom because she was in the bathroom the room over. I knew she was in there because I could quite literally hear her in there. I hid under my blanket and held my little pink bear until my mom opened the door because she was done in the bathroom. She asked if I wanted to make pink lemonade with her and I said yes because I didn't want to be in there anymore. When we walked to the living room, I sat on the couch with my mom in the kitchen. I then looked over to the bathroom next to the kitchen to see a man. He was covered in bandages and he had red eyes. I don't scream, I just look at the TV that was playing Curious George. The man disappeared the next time I looked. The second story. When I was younger, I think in elementary school, I used to stay outside till late, like 11 o'clock each night during the summer, and my old friends would play hide and seek and tag. I was one of the seekers. There were 2 seekers because it was a big group. I was walking around the neighborhood with the other kids, and we stopped at one house because we knew nobody lived there, so it was a perfect hiding spot. We both saw it. It was tall and thin and moved around. We saw it through a window type thing in the yard. Another seeker saw it too because she whispered, "What the fuck?" We ran away from the house and I didn't go far from my house after that for the rest of this time I was outside. I didn't know about the not running away thing at the time. Story 3, the last story. Me and 2 other friends were hanging out and one of my friends was called inside by his stepdad. Me and my friend were laying in the field of his house. It was a pretty windy day. It was going to rain that day. My neighborhood was surrounded by woods and the wind was crazy. We didn't pay it any mind though. We were talking about like Pokemon cards or something. But we realized that everything went silent. My friend does not believe it all and even he was scared. I felt the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck spike, and then we heard a loud leave, and then a quiet run. We looked at each other and I asked if he heard that too, and he said yeah. We zoomed out of there and right as we both got into our house it starts thundering. And then a few minutes later lightning struck near the field that we were in. I have more stories. Word of warning, this is going to be long and it's still ongoing. I live in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania and I live near the woods. There's a big part of the woods that's massive, dense wood. I also have a vocal stem and I mimic a lot of things I hear. Birds, internet memes, voice clips, etc. This has been happening my whole life, but especially for around 3 or 4 months or so. I started seeing a lot of deer in the woods, way more than usual. When I noticed them, it's like they noticed me too. One time I look up and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked away quickly and haven't been able to forget the dread I felt when I looked into my eyes. I went to lay back in my bed. At the time I had blackout curtains and my cat was in heat, so she was constantly in my window yapping. Later that day I heard something outside. It sounded like her, but I knew it wasn't my kitten because she was sleeping right next to me. I put my headphones on and didn't pay any attention. Eventually my kitten woke back up and started yapping again, but she was staying away from the window I heard it from. I've been seeing paw and bare footprints in the snow and mud, especially at the bus stop. I've been hearing yips, whispers, and whistles coming from the woods. The newest story was like 30 minutes ago. My sister was telling me about how she was hearing sirens in our neighborhood by the house out near ours. She told me that they sounded off, but didn't know how to describe it. We live in a very small neighborhood, and the part she heard it from was the one that was half engulfed in woods. I told her the rules about not talking about it and ignoring it, and she was like, "Oh, oops." I think the oldest memory I can think of is when I heard a baby giggling when I was walking home from school, and it wasn't just me who heard it. My friend also heard it and freaked out a bit, but I told her not to run. I knew the rules and I didn't want to get chased because I was way out of shape and my backpack weighed 30 pounds. This morning my sister told me that she heard my dad tell me and my brother to get up for school, but my dad had been gone all week and wasn't supposed to get back until later that night. I told her don't pay any attention to it and she said okay. I went to school right after and just didn't feel right, and I was walking to the bus stop. I started to hear birds chirp, but it sounded like how I did them. I'm not very good at mimicking most bird calls, and I end up making some breathy, drawn-out sounds. The other people at the bus stop noticed it and looked at the tree line. I knew to keep my head down and just to walk to the edge of the road where we waited. I've been hearing my bird calls for the past weekend, but I've been ignoring it. This is all I can think of right now, but sorry, it's out of order. That's fine. So, I mean, you know the rules. You're doing all of the right things in case it is something. Yeah, it does sound like something is lurking around there. I don't necessarily think it's a mimic, so that's good. but I think there is something around outside and maybe something inside of your house. I don't really get the vibes that anything's that bad, so that's good. But it does seem like something is going on. All right, next story. I have multiple stories. If you want me to share them all, let me know. Also, I love your cats. Oh, yes, please share them all. This happened when I was around 7 to 8 years old. I grew up in a small town which is basically 6 neighbors and nothing but miles and miles of woods. It was early spring and I was in my room watching TV when I suddenly noticed it was silent in the rest of the house. I came out to investigate and found out that I had been left alone on accident. I was a little nervous but decided to go outside and get on my swing that was hanging from the oak tree in between my house and the back part of the property where my grandfather lived in a small camper. I was swinging and singing as most little girls do when all of a sudden I hear what sounds like car door shutting and my dad calling for me. Well, immediately without thinking, I run back to my house to see what my dad wanted, but no cars were there. The front door was still shut. I'm scanning my surroundings looking for my dad when I hear him calling me from the woods. I froze for a split second before making the decision to look in the trees, and I immediately got a sinking feeling. I ran back inside. I locked all the doors and windows and closed all the blinds and went to hide under my bed until everyone came home. So that's something not a lot of people talk about, but we're going to talk about it right now. So of course these things in the woods can mimic voices and like animal sounds. They can mimic sounds as well. Like in the last story, oh, I'm shaking the tripod. Sorry, I had to move you guys around a bit. I was hitting the tripod. Back to what I was saying. These things can mimic sounds as well, as we saw in the last one where it was sirens, and in this one it seems like it's a car door. They can mimic anything to get your attention, and I just feel like it's not talked about enough, but they can and they do. All right, next story. I've moved around a lot to a few states and have experiences in all of them. I'm from Colorado. I've lived in several areas around here. I lived in Wyoming for about a year and somehow accumulated the spookiest encounters I've ever had while I was there. I have some interesting stories from California as well, but most of my experiences have been in Colorado. Since then, where I've spent most of my life, I'd probably have to break up my Colorado stories by towns I was in over more than one email, and I can give you a list if you want to choose what you want to hear about next, if that's something you or your listeners are interested in. Anything I share will absolutely be lengthy, so be prepared for that. So they gave me the brief descriptions of what happened in each town, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I want to hear about all of them, but I think first I would really like to hear about Denver, because you said you've been cut off when trying to talk about it before. So I want to hear that one first, but I want to hear them all. Today I'll talk about Wyoming, since that's what pulls me to reach out to you with these stories. There's so much that happened there that I can't say them in any particular order, so I'll try my best to touch on what I can remember. This all happened in 2009 to 2010. We came to the conclusion that this house was some kind of portal because despite any efforts to cleanse that space and energy, it would get rid of what was there, but more kept making their way through. It starts pretty small, but significantly strong at the same time, if that makes any sense. Like the moments were fleeting, but enough to grab your attention. For some reason, I felt like mentioning that the address was a number and a 1/2, which is why it felt like unusual. I'm not sure how much that plays into anything, but it adds to the fact that there was something different and off about that house. That's strange. We'll talk about that. Don't let me forget. We'll start in the bathroom. Whenever I took a shower, something would throw my mesh poof at my back. I kept it wedged pretty snug on a wire shelf that hung off the shower head, so it wasn't really in the position to just fall off on its own. And it hit me at a force and angle that didn't make any sense for it to just be a fall. The bathroom mirror put out an energy that you wanted to avoid looking into, out of fear of seeing something you'd rather not. My sister's room was next to that bathroom, and there were 2 different times that I saw a little girl, clear as you and I, in the flesh, young, dripping wet, not unlike the girl out of The Ring. One time I saw her sitting at the edge of my sister's bed with her head down. The other time she was standing in the doorway looking up at me as I walked out of the bathroom. So, in the living room, there were a couple of TVs, one that worked and a huge one that didn't. No idea why it was even there, other than probably just being too big for any of us to move it out of there. I frequently would see reflections of a large man standing in the doorway or someone close behind me. And they weren't supposed to be there, so I turned around to look at them, yet they'd still be standing there when I looked back at the reflection. My niece and I would both have visions, for lack of any other word or explanation, at the same time of a spirit revealing itself to us that was pretty gruesome. Frail, haggard, corpse-like, with the skin on the side of their jaw missing, like you could see their skeletal jaw and teeth. This would ended up attaching itself to my niece for years after the fact, even after moving a few times. Her and I both had an interest in this stuff, and we tried to communicate in various ways to see what we could figure out about what was going on or what they wanted. You know, learn the hard way, don't do that. We tried a makeshift paper Ouija board, a pendulum, and a couple of seances, all at different times. Whatever it was, absolutely did want to talk. Not much through paper Ouija, but definitely some strong answers with the pendulum. There was only a few of us living there, but there was a lot of family members and friends of my sisters and their friends that were constantly coming and going through that house. So we decided to ask the spirits what they thought of each of the people we knew. They seemed fine with everyone except a hard no towards my sister's boyfriend at the time, which honestly fair, I would agree. My favorite story to date is what came after learning this. So my niece and I were discussing this with the family and the boyfriend about talking to the ghosts of the house and how they felt about them. We were across the room from him, us on the living room couch, him by himself behind the counter that divided the kitchen from the living room. We casually tell him, yeah, we were talking to the ghosts and they don't like you. And he yelled, well, ghosts aren't real. Not even 1 second later, we all watched this glass candle lift straight up a couple feet in the air off the opposite end of the counter from where he's standing. And then it flows inches past his face, barely missing him. His eyes were so wide, and I've never in my life seen such an undeniable proof of a presence to a non-believer that needed to be put in his place, and that's why I love this story so much. Moving on, now I'll tell you some stories about the bedroom I was staying in. And warning, you might want to keep a light on for these, because boy do I wish that there was better lighting in there. My room was the scariest because of the lack of windows and lighting in general. It probably would have been a better storage area than a bedroom. There was no overhead light and probably the dimmest lamp you could imagine that you really could hardly see anything at all in there. It was so damn dark. There was something off about the closet in there, and I was too scared to go near or pull anything out of it. At night, I would see little shadows running along the wall towards the ceiling, which was all enough to make me feel uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. The next two stories I have, I can't remember which came first, but they can be the grand final of these Wyoming tales for tonight. So you heard them. Turn on a light. You should have already done that if you were watching this video. One night, my niece was spending the night in my bedroom, and we were sharing the bed. I wake up out of a deep sleep to see the most horrified look on her face. I was super confused in my sleepy days and asked her what was wrong. She was like, you didn't feel that. Still confused, I'm like, no? Feel what? The bed was shaking. If I felt it before, I must have assumed it was the wobbly feeling I sometimes get as I'm drifting into a deep sleep. And I thought nothing of it, but I assure you, I sure as hell felt it every time it happened from that point on. It happened all the time. Eventually, my niece loaned me her nightlight, and for whatever reason, that was enough to keep it from happening, as long as my drunk ass remembered to turn it on before I went to bed. But due to said drinking at the time in my life, I didn't always remember to turn it on before I passed out, and sure enough, every time I forgot, I'd wake up to my bed violently shaking. Like someone huge was lifting the end of it and shaking it as hard as they could. Mind you, this bed was a mattress on the floor. No bed frame. I even saw a silhouette of what looked like a shadow of a muscular dude over 6 feet tall leaning over my bed as it was shaking. Last story. Because my niece and I made the connection that the strongest activity happened in my room, we had the not brilliant idea to have a seance in there to see what was up with that. As Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman famously said, big mistake. Big, huge. We were set up in the middle of my floor with a candle between us. It was another one of those candles in a glass jar like the one mentioned earlier, but a different one. As we were getting started and beginning to ask our questions, about an inch-wide triangle-shaped chunk of glass from the candle jar cracked perfectly, right in the middle of it. It flew out and hit me in the knee. Stunned at what we just saw, I picked up the piece and it was cold, not like the room temperature and the rest of the candle had. It wasn't even burning long enough to melt much of the wax, let alone affect the temperature of the jar. So yeah, we noped pretty much immediately after that and said our goodbyes and wrapped things up. We never messed with any of that stuff again. Neither of us have ever tried to communicate with ghosts or entities or anything else of the kind since. Though we do still see and experience things all the time just the same. We're just not trying to talk to them anymore. And that's what I got. Thanks for listening. And if you want more stories, say the word. I watch all your videos and I'll tell you anything you want to know. Let's be spooky friends in chat. Yes, please. Okay. Oh my God. I want to know who or what was in that house so bad though. Like, I understand you holding seances and making Ouija boards to try and communicate because there was so much going on there. I do want to tell a little bit of one of my own stories because it reminded me of it. I think I've told this on TikTok before. But okay, so I grew up in a really haunted house that had a lot of similar things that happened in this one. And I remember one time, my whole family was, and we had, so our living room was right here, and then there was like a counter that separated into the kitchen. And I remember my whole family was in the living room, and my friend that I had over was in the kitchen, and we were all talking. And my friend was like, oh my God, what is happening? And we all look up at her to see this glass that had been sitting on the counter. It was one of those plastic, like, tall ones that you find in, like, pizza places. It was literally just empty, not wet, no reason, and the house isn't slanted, so, like, there was no reason for this. But it just slid perfectly all the way across the counter in front of all of us. And the candle moving made me think of that. So, yeah, stuff like that definitely does happen. The part of this, there was a lot of parts of this that shocked me. The one part that really got me was the like perfect triangle that was ice cold coming out of that candle and the glass just slamming into their knee. What do you mean? That is terrifying. But yes, please send me literally all of your stories. I will wait. Like, take your time sending them. Obviously, I will keep them in a separate folder and we'll do an entire story of your videos, like of your stories. And I can even retell this one. Please do that. I am begging you. All right, next story. When I was 4, I moved to a different house in the same town. New construction on a lot where there used to be little old classic Florida type houses. My brand new bedroom was on the 2nd floor with a window and glass door facing our balcony. My bed was in the middle of the back wall, no facing the corner to hide from me, so my head is right by the window, about 5 feet to my right. I loved my new room a lot, and I played on the balcony regularly. I was supervised, don't worry. The balcony overlooked our backyard, which attaches to a public park, no fence or anything. I wouldn't qualify it as an actual wooded area, but I've never had any sort of negative feeling there or anything supernatural at all. It's just a pleasant public park with a little creek and some benches. Well, about a month or so after we moved in, I was laying down trying to sleep when I heard a hollow thump sound, like something jumping on the balcony. I turned over to look out my window and froze when I saw what was there. There was 2 bright blue centers, each about the size of a large fist or a grapefruit. They were near the top of my window, about 7 feet, and moved in tandem with my eyes. But they had no pupils or anything. I couldn't see any hint of face or a figure at all. They moved around together like something tilting their head around. It felt curious and not outwardly malicious, but I was frozen. I held my eyes open so I wouldn't blink, making prolonged eye contact with this thing. Eventually it turned away and left, and I eventually fell asleep. At this time I was a little kid and obsessed with the Transformers movies, so I thought, oh my gosh, it's Bumblebee. I told my parents that I saw him outside my window, and they thought it was me having an overactive imagination and not a small child mistaking some sort of entity for a favorite movie character. I didn't really think it was him, but I was so creeped out I chose to interpret it as a familiar figure instead of the scariest thing on the freaking planet. I shut those blinds on that window and door, and they've stayed shut ever since, even during the day. I do get sleep paralysis, and no one believes me still that something jumped 20 feet into the air to land on the balcony and stare at me for a few minutes. I have noticed since the blue lights do help me fall asleep. I got blue fairy lights at the age of 9 and still have them in my apartment to this day. The house was definitely slightly haunted from being built on a lot where someone passed. But Charles, the ghost, was nice, so I didn't mind. I think he passed on a few years back, actually. I'm not sensitive to those kinds of things, but I do have some stories from relatives who see ghosts and some family friends who get accurate omens of death, so let me know if you want to hear any of those. Yes! Okay, side note from that, why was I picking up, like, extraterrestrial vibes from the blue lights instead of an entity? Like, I could definitely be wrong, but that's the vibes I was picking up. It just seems like other planet-y. Is anyone else feeling that? And I don't know why I'm feeling that, because I've seen that exact same thing in red, and I, like, fully think it's an entity. I don't know why I'm just picking up, like, alien vibes, but I am. Like, was that an alien? Has anyone else had that happen? I don't. Anyways, that is all for today. Thank you to everyone who sent me in a story, and I will see you tomorrow to read more stories.